Hey gang, welcome to the Wilson Combat YouTube channel. I got my buddy Bill Wilson. He's visiting me here in Idaho. It's another segment of the Gun Guys. This is kind of a cool one. We're going to talk about the history of Wilson Combat. And I've asked Bill to, help me out on this. As a matter of fact, it turns out there's so much info you actually had to put together a cheat sheet to remember what's happening.
Yeah, we had to put several heads together to get all the facts straight.
45 years of history in your business is pretty interesting. And everybody's interested in how did this whole thing get started. And obviously you had tried to get a custom pistol built in 1911 back in those days, and there was a wait period that was a problem. And then obviously at some point you told me you decided, well, heck, I'll make my own.
Well, I mean, the short version of that whole deal was getting serious about the competition shooting, and just like everybody else, well, if I had a better gun, I'd shoot better. Instead of, okay, I need to go load and shoot more ammo.
Yeah.
I had a Gold Cup I was shooting that I'd bought a extended thumb safety from Jim Clark, which back then, he made it by welding up a tab on it, nobody even made an extended thumb safety back in those days.
Yeah.
And so I put that extended thumb safety on, and I beveled the mag well a little bit on it, and the gun it just happened to be one of those Colts that actually somebody had fit the extractor properly, so the gun worked. Yep. I mean, it shot well, it worked, and I did the two most important things to it there. Got a thumb safety I could flip off and help with a load, because I mean, being a Gold Cup, it already had a good trigger pull on it and good sights, and so I was doing well with that gun. But no, I'll do better if I had a custom. 1911. So I send one off to a big name maker on the East Coast there, and get it back, and oh God, I just all kinds of problems with it. I mean, cosmetically looked great, function wise not so great. So okay, by that time I'd kind of become friends with Jim Clark Sr. So I send one down there, and it comes back, and it's a whole lot better than the other one, but it's not what I want, And so I got thinking, well, if I can make clock parts and make jewelry and work on watches, I mean, surely these big huge parts in a 1911 45, I can work on one of those. And so built my own gun, and next thing you know, win a match with it, and a buddy says build me one, and another buddy says build me one, and it's like I can either continue to be miserable going in working as a jeweler every day and not making any money, or I can tinker with guns and not make any money and enjoy going to work every day.
Speaking of parts, what was the first part that you actually manufactured as a Wilson Combat?
Yeah, it was the #1 trigger. I mean,
which is the old famous three-hole trigger.
With a three-hole trigger, because in the early days, all the parts were, it was just chronological, part number. The trigger was #1, the shock buff was #2. Little story on the shock buff. That was actually an idea of Armand Swenson's. He made them out of leather, I think, at the time.
The first ones were leather.
But the idea of having a buffer in there to mitigate the smack of the slide back on the frame, because the guns are notorious for cracking. Oh, right about there, absolutely. Where the front of the frame rails were.
Yeah.
And so I was visiting Armand out at his house, and he said, "Laddie, why don't you do something with that?" I said, I've got all I can do with my, building guns and my ambi safeties. I'm not going to do anything with it. And so we, had mold made and tested lots of different, polymers and brought the product to market. And I asked Armand, I said, well, do you care if we patent that, or co-patent it or whatever? He said, no, Laddie, if you want to do it, you just do whatever you want to do with it. And I talked to a patent attorney, and it was going to be like $2,000 to get a patent on that. We're talking like 19.
That was a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it was 1979 or so. And I was like, we'll never sell enough of those to justify spending $2,000 to get a patent on that. And I don't even know how many million of them we've sold. Since then.
And people to this day argue shock buffs, no shock buffs, and I tell people, one, most of us cracked guns, slides, and frames. Part of it was we didn't understand about the recoil spring changes that we should have done. But still, and I think manufacturing techniques You know, a lot of these guns, the old guns in the cold era, they had square 90-degree corners in there, which set up stress risers. And so the new manufacturing processes with CNC alleviates all that. But still, people ask me about, do you use them? My answer is yes. Like in a 9mm, they last forever.
Yeah, I run them in all my guns.
Yeah.
I don't have a single
trick
1911 that I don't run them in.
And the trick I found is some guns eat them up in 200 rounds they're going. Some guns will go a lot longer. Kind of learn how your gun likes them. If you don't want them, what the heck, take them out.
Yeah.
So one of the things I remember, and I think forever has changed the 1911 world, is when you brought out the model 47.
Yeah, that was probably the shock buff and the 47 series magazine. That was the highlight of the first decade of Wilson Combat.
Yeah.
Those are the two high points of the first decade. I mean, we built, more and more guns. I mean, that was during the time frame that I brought, several of the initial employees on board. Ron Phillips and Angela Smith and Mikey and Vic and Jim. Those guys all came on board, and they're still there. But believe it or not, only one of the original 7 employees aren't still at the company, and unfortunately the other one passed away.
Yeah.
So we've got pretty good retention of our people there.
Yeah.
But the 47 series magazine solved lots of problems.
Oh,
The material that the lack of mag was the mag as far as function back then.
Yeah. I remember you first off actually started selling some of those.
We were selling
your plastic base plate, a pad that was glued onto them. I've got one somewhere. Yeah.
But the problem with the lack of mag, they were made out of stainless material that was bad about cracking. Remember they would always crack back there in the corner. Yeah. I mean, and relatively quickly if you actually used them a lot, especially if you eject them out with some rounds still left in it on a hard surface.
Yeah.
And so, the primary things we did initially on the magazine project was, a different type of stainless, and we put a half moon at the back, so there was no, as you say,
the stress riser out.
Took the area out there.
And put the slam pad on it.
Yeah, put the base pad on it, and that was a collaboration project between me and Bill Rogers. Basically, I worked on the tube, and Bill worked on the plastic parts. Bill's the one that developed the polymer follower for it, and the base pads, and we worked with our old friend Walt Wolf Sr. To get a good magazine spring for it that would hold up well and all that.
All right, I guess one of the questions a lot of people is, why didn't you patent that? Kind of the same deal. You never thought that?
Well, I'm not sure there was really anything there that was patentable.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, there were other magazines on the market that had the slots in them. Yeah. There are other magazines at that time on the market that had a half moon at the back of it there. I mean, it was pretty early for a polymer follower, but I'm not sure it was the first polymer follower or whatever.
Do you have any idea how many Wilson magazines you guys have sold?
No, I'm sure it's well over 1 million of them. I'm sure. I'd say between 1 and 2 million. We're in that bracket somewhere. A lot of them, and we've over the years we've gradually made improvements on them.
Oh yeah, it's evolved dramatically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like now we're running some real high grade 17.7 stainless springs in them.
Yeah.
The springs hold up longer than the original ones did, and they're corrosion resistant.
A lot of people now, one of the big things in the gun culture, shooting culture, is compensators. Mm-hmm. Most people realize that actually was nothing new. Mm-hmm. In that first decade of Wilson Combat, you guys introduced the AccuComp.
Yeah, that was based on our cheat sheet here in 1981. We brought out the AccuComp, and of course that was when in IPSC shooting, that was when everybody had to go to a pin gun or a comp gun, because now the standard 5-inch is no longer competitive.
Yeah, I remember guys would say, I'm going to Wilson gun, and they, what do you want? Whatever the gun is that Rob Latham uses. And I think you actually you had one model, LE, was Latham Enos version. 38 Super was the big thing.
Yep, that was the most effective one we ever built. That was right towards the end of working with Robbie and you know, when Springfield made him the $1 Million Man. Remember that turned the whole practical shooting community on its ear there when you know, Robbie got hired on a 10-year contract, you know, for $100,000 a year, but you know, and became we always call him the $1 Million Man, and of course, you know, that was not little Wilson Combat couldn't compete with a business offer like that.
And that first decade, you were basically taking the customers' guns, Colts or Springfield Armories.
Mostly all Colts back then.
So you were basically doing customers' custom guns in that era.
Yeah.
Well, in the second decade, we'll say from
87 to 96.
Yeah. You started to really branch out a bit. And obviously one of the things that I remember is when you bought Scattergun Technologies.
Yeah, and that, for a lot of years, that was a real big piece of our business. I mean, that was when law enforcement, you know, that's what they carried in the trunk of the car or in the rack in the car. I mean, the thought of a you know, patrol carbine, really, you know, nobody really got into that.
Yeah, it hadn't come around yet.
Yeah, it was shotgun, and most of that scattergun business, that was mostly law enforcement business. I mean, we did some for civilians, but the bulk of it was law enforcement.
Didn't the Border Patrol buy some of your H-70s at one time?
And Secret Service.
Yeah. Let's see, some of the other things you did, for example, I'm looking at the list there, is you got into the Magnum Hunter series of handguns.
Yeah, I got, during the late 80s there, I really got into handgun hunting real seriously, and so we dabbled in doing custom work on Smith & Wesson and Ruger revolvers, you know, for hunting. Probably never made any money at it, but it was still fun playing with them.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing during the era, and I remember this. Your original business was really somewhat primarily funneled towards the competition world, IPSC competition.
Yep.
And I remember you and I discussing that you were well aware of the fact that, and you were actually probably more aware of it than anybody else. You sensed the change of the weather, that self-defense, practical guns, real practical guns were the future. And I think you made a decision that I'm going to change my product line more geared towards, you know, non-competition, more towards everyday carry, you know, self-defense, more law enforcement, that type of market of handguns. Yeah,
we pretty much went from a competition-oriented company to real-world self-defense company there in the, you know, late 80s, early 90s time frames, you know, right in there.
That era is where you first broke away and said, we're going to brand our own guns. And you basically were, I think you were buying from outside vendors your slides and frames, but you were starting to market a Wilson Combat gun. You weren't necessarily using a Colt or Springfield Army gun.
In 96, we started building the first Wilson Combat gun. You know, where it was actually, you know, Wilson branded gun, and we built the whole gun, as opposed to a customer sending in a Colt or Springfield Army or whatever for us to customize.
Again, I remember when you brought out the 1996 A1, that was kind of your approach to updating the 1911 A1 pistols to the, should we say, the current era. That was a big step.
And yeah, it was our first complete gun, and it was a complete flop. You know, I mean, you know, like we were talking yesterday, you know, it's like, every time we try to bring a lower price, lower end 1911 out, it's always a failure. You know, everybody wants more, not less. You know, it's like even, you know, one of our flagship models, you know, is the CQB Elite. You know, and I mean, let's face it, it's got pretty much everything anybody would ever want or need. You know, on a 1911, it's already got it. But hardly anybody will just order a standard CQB Elite. They'll always order a CQB Elite, but I want you to add this. I mean, it's still not enough, even though, you know, in my mind, it's got everything
You
that
need.
you would possibly need. It's
Yeah.
just like the X-Tac Elite and the CQB Elite. They're pretty much full featured guns, but people never order them that way. They always order them with this, and this added to it.
And you know, I've seen it in probably internet. People will make comments. Well, Wilson Combat, they're not custom guns. They're just, you're buying a gun that's a package gun, and it's not made by a gunsmith. It's just assembled and yada yada. Well, that's nothing can be further from the truth. One is you can order a CQB, but you can add or subtract as long as you want. You can get the gun made the way you want it.
Exactly.
The other one is this illusion that you guys don't build custom guns. I think is, if people understand, you go back and look at some of the videos where we visited different shops. You know, there's a big argument. Well, I want a gun that one pistol smith builds it completely. That somehow means that you got a better gun, and I think that's erroneous. In that, you guys you have steps like shop one. The customer's gun, that's where the slide to frame is fitted, that's where the barrel is fitted to the gun, that's where the grip save is fitted to the gun. Those guys are really specialists at that skill. The trouble is saying, well, I want one guy to build my gun. You often end up with, not always, but you often end up with people that are, you know, jacks of all trades and masters of none. And so, for example, we've all seen guys that beautiful guns, but let's say maybe the barrel fit isn't exactly right, or the classy one, the trigger pull isn't all that great. But if you go, say the gun goes to shop two, where it gets things like grip safety fitted, the trigger job's done, you can actually build a gun as good, it may be even better than one guy, if you have specialists in each particular phase doing the manufacturing process.
Well, and from gun to gun, they'll be much more consistent.
More consistent.
But I always like to just kind of compare to the medical industry, for example. Let's just say, heaven forbid, Ken, I mean, you've got some serious health issues. You know, I'm going to need a knee replacement. You know, I'm going to need a shoulder repair here. I mean, my heart's going bad on me. Looks like I'm going to have a bypass and all that stuff. What do you want to do? You want to go to a doctor that's going to do all those things, or do you want to go to the best guy that does knees, the best guy that does shoulders, and the best guy that does hearts?
Yeah.
And that's what they do every day. They work on hearts, they work on shoulders, and they work on knees.
Yep.
That's kind of the way we build guns.
Yep.
I mean, the guy that's best at doing triggers does triggers.
Yep.
The guy that's best at barrel fitting does barrel fit.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I like to compare
And
it.
there are a handful of pistol smiths out there that are, you know, the guys who build the gun themselves. And they do beautiful work.
Oh, they're usually 1 or 2 man shop.
Yeah, and generally you pay accordingly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to get a $8,000 1911 out of a deal like that.
My buddy Jason Burton down in Arizona is a one-man shop, Heirloom
and
Precision.
does beautiful work.
Does fantastic work.
Yeah.
But I can assure you, when you get the gun and you get the invoice, you're probably going to. But doesn't take it away from his gun. It is it's a really specialized piece of equipment.
Yeah.
He does it all, and he does it beautifully. But for most people, you know, I'm convinced that if you laid his gun down and you laid this gun down, is the Jason Burton gun a beautiful gun and a nice gun? Absolutely. But you could say, is it, from a shooter standpoint or using it as part, is it a gun that's worth 2 or 3 times the cost of this gun? And my answer is probably not. And I think Jason would tell you the same thing. I know he uses a lot of your components, recommends your guns, loves Wilson Combat products, because he recognizes, and if you were to ask him for the money, am I better off to buy your gun or buy a Wilson Combat gun? And he'll say, yeah, for the money, the Wilson Combat gun's the way to go. But if you want one of my guns, yeah, and he only builds, you know, probably less than 20 guns a year. And in order to run his business and feed his family, he can't do that for $3,000 a gun. Mm-hmm. So you pay accordingly. So one thing I wanted to touch on in the second generation, we're going to say from 87 to say 96, is you guys stepped up with a couple of specialty packages that I think some people forget about. But for example, you had a couple guns that I'm going to guess you kind of went for what we'll call name brand or guns. They weren't really terribly successful at that point in history. But for example, you did a Thunder Ranch special, but so did another manufacturer made them.
Yeah, more than one has worked with Clint on stuff like that.
Yeah, and
but the big takeaway from that second, decade of Wilson Combat was the rebranding of the company.
Yeah.
You know, that's when we actually really branded the company as Wilson Combat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'd struggle with different logos and, you know, calling it just Wilson's and, you know, different things. And that's when we actually focused on, you know, okay, this is the brand we're going to work with from here on out.
Yeah.
And this is the brand we're going to build.
When you guys jumped into what we'll call the third decade, which is basically 1997 to 2006, a couple of things I remember that was real important was that I think that was a decade where you guys got into the AR-15 business.
Yeah, yeah. The two biggies of that decade was we started building ARs, and you know, with your, you know, urging and help, that's when the CQB series started, which has been, you know, hands down our most well received.
And I remember when I had the guys in the shop build that first CQB for me, and I wanted the OD green frame and the black slide.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that was the most hideous. I mean, I remember those guys like, they just thought, this is so stupid. This is just, why would you, they called it the frog gun. Why did anybody want a frog gun? Well, as it turns out, it took off.
Yeah, oh yeah, it took off. I mean, early on, back then, I mean, almost everybody ordered a CQB, you know, green and black. Mm-hmm. You know, of course, that's evolved now to the point of it's weird. You know, we offer all these different finishes and all these different colors and all that stuff, and still the big seller is black on black. You know, black slide, black frame, black grips.
Kind of like Henry Ford, you know.
Yeah. That's what.
Now, there's another product that came along in that third decade, which I think has had better. It's not a big money item, but has really made a pretty good imprint. It was your whole Ultima Lube product line, which has grown. Has actually evolved quite a bit, because, you know, everybody asks, what's the best lube? What's free? Mm-hmm. But there are lubes that are actually much better suited for firearms. You know, I think now you've got, of lubes alone, you got Ultima Lube, you've got like a medium, and you got a light oil lube.
Yeah, we've got a light standard oil, the kind of the universal that's kind of between an oil and a grease. You know, we've got a grease, and then we've got the extreme, you know, that's all synthetic.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I use all of them, but for year round, really, you know, as long as you're willing to put lube on your gun, because a lot of people don't think that's important, but where I live in the wintertime, the light oil is the way to go. But you know what, I almost use it year round now. And what I've learned, and we both agree on, although sometimes we dispute over the amount, but the key thing to a metal frame gun,
keeping it lubed.
Keeping it lubed.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be clean. It just needs to have some lube on it.
You know, my old CQB that we were looking at the other day, I've went 2,000, 3,000 rounds without cleaning the gun, but I lube it regularly. And the only drawback that is, one is I don't clean it because I'm lazy, and it's not my primary carry gun. But if I'm carrying it, I'll clean it. But the kicker is, it never misses a beat. And you look inside, it looks like a coal mine. The drawback to doing that is when times to clean it, man.
Now it's a major job.
It is a job. And you end up with, Paula gets mad because I have whatever shirt I'm wearing, it's got all that black carving over it, and it doesn't wash out, you know. So, but yeah, Ultima Lube came real good. And let's talk about, in that third decade, you guys actually introduced what was known as the Bill Wilson Signature Series. Tell me a little bit about how that came about.
It was just, you know, I've always been asked, well, what's your favorite spec of a gun or whatever? And so we just decided, well, heck, we'll just come up with some Bill Wilson Signature stuff that, you know, just spec the gun out the same way that I would spec my own gun out. And, you know, which is kind of a good idea, other than the fact that, you know, let's face it, our tastes change.
Oh yeah.
You know, my favorite gun today isn't the same spec gun that it was 10 years ago or 10 years before that. You know, it's always evolving. And so, you know, kind of when the X9 series came out, we kind of phased out some of that signature stuff, because I mean, it's like, you know, you can't. Then you have an X9 series signature, whatever. Then the next thing you know, then that's changed, and you know, because I'm already on the third version of an X9 series gun that's my favorite. Yeah. You know.
Well, you know, I think what's interesting in this 45th year anniversary process we're going through, the new gun and the time about it, literally the fourth decade, which basically kicks off, you know, into 2007 to 16. The bottom line is, in many ways, that was the biggest growth as far as what's going on at Wilson Combat, product-wise, expansion. I mean, it's a lot to cover, but for example, I remember when you actually brought out what we now call the ETM series, or the Elite series, which I think is the pinnacle of 1911 45 magazines and the 9mm magazines.
Yeah, and it's just keeps surprising me. I mean, the 500 series magazine, in just about any way you look at it, is a better product than the 47 series. I mean, we improved it in numerous ways. 47 series still sells 2 to 1.
Yeah.
And there's not that much price difference. You can't say, well, it's because the other one's more expensive.
No.
There's not that much price difference in them. But still, the original 47D is still by far the best seller. And I know you and we both use 500 series,
Yep.
magazines. So,
when you asked to have this list made up, one of the sweethearts and really one of the powerhouses of Wilson Combat, when she listed in here, it's pretty neat. Look, she lists Tressa was hired.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's so shy.
She's so shy.
But she's a sweetheart, and Lord knows she's
one
of your major assets in that industry.
I don't know if we can function without Tressa. I mean, so she's been there since 2008. Yeah.
Bulletproof parts. Tell me about that.
There's customers out there that, no matter how good it is, if the part's made by the MEM process or investment casting process, they don't want it in their gun.
Yeah.
They want to buy a gun that's made like they were made back in the heyday,
back in 1930s.
Yeah, or even up through the 60s. I mean,
they want forged parts.
Yeah, they want forged, fully machined from billet type parts. And so it's like, well, if you're going to do that, there's no reason to just do a part. Let's just do all the critical parts that way. So even the grip safety. But let's face it, I mean, a MEM or a cast grip safety
is just fine.
There's no reason not to have one of those on a premium gun. But our customers want a fully machined one. So we take a big block of steel and machine off everything that doesn't look like a grip safety, and we got a fully machined bulletproof grip safety.
Oh.
They sell pretty good as a component, and we put them on almost every gun we build.
And that kind of gets back to, I get people all the time say, I'd like that Wilson Combat gun, but they're too expensive. And I'm sure from the comments, you periodically get that, people saying, I wish I could afford one, or they're too expensive. You build a gun for a customer demographic that wants a high-grade gun, and they're willing to pay for it. I tell people, some people go out and buy BMWs, and some people go out and buy Toyota Corollas. If you race to the low end, there's a lot of people in that market.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you've said, no, we're going to build a product for a demographic in the marketplace that wants a premium product and will pay that. Mm-hmm. And I think people need to understand that. We all understand that, like a lot of guys I know, when we were younger, we were in the same boat. You're trying to pay a mortgage and raise a family and make a car payment. Going out and buying a real expensive gun is not something that most people have that opportunity. As life goes on, most of us end up doing a little better. And I often tell people, when you reach a point in life when you got the mortgage paid off, or you got the kids out of school, why not reward yourself with the gun you want, which is, let's face it, is a prized possession. And so I tell people, you don't have to give up, just wait till the time's right, and they'll make you a gun.
Well, it's no different than the auto industry. There's certain demographic that's going to buy a BMW, Mercedes, even Ferrari, Lamborghini, and there's that same demographic that's going to buy a Chevy or a Ford or a Toyota or whatever.
Exactly.
There's business out there for different market segments, and we kind of cater to the market segments that's same kind of people that maybe would buy a little higher end automobile, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But one thing too, we do offer the financing program. We've worked with the local bank there, and they have a really a good financing program for these guns. So if somebody wants to buy one that way, it's an option for them.
That's worth I tell a lot of people, if you look at what you spend, I don't care if you go stop at Starbucks every day and get a cup of coffee, or you know, a guy smokes, you say, what do you pay for a pack of or a carton of cigarettes? You can look at it from a standpoint, if you're willing to make some compromises, you can probably afford one easier than you think you can.
Yeah, probably so.
Well,
since the fourth decade here, a lot happened.
A lot happened in the fourth decade.
You know, we don't have time to go over every single thing, but I'd like to point out, you know, we've already talked about the 500 series, you know, elite series of the magazines, which, you know, I feel the best magazines on the market. Of course, the most important thing of the decade is Tressa came on board.
Yeah.
That's when we started bulletproof parts. We discussed that. That's when we started making the TTUs for the ARs, which, you know, I still think is one of the
real
highest quality trigger units available for an AR.
I didn't realize in 2010 you guys started your YouTube channel.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously important.
Well, and let's face it, that has grown dramatically since 2010.
Oh yeah, and it's been fun doing it. You know, working with you and Masad and you know, with the production people and everything. It's been fun. But a biggie was that's when we started the ammo company.
Oh
yeah. I mean, and there's a little bit of a story there. I'm not gonna dwell on it, but you know, basically started the ammo division, you know, as to give my son-in-law something to do. You know, that was started for son-in-law Cam, you know, and he ran it for, I don't know, 3-4 years. I don't remember how long it was, and then decided to go into the big corporate world, you know, and then of course we just kept it going, and it's been a major part of the company, you know. But that was actually, you know, started for OCAM. And you know, he went and did the corporate world, worked his way up the corporate ladder, got a lot of real world experience. You know, that's some pretty high level companies, and now comes back, and he, you know, as you know, he runs the day-to-day operations of the company now as a chief operating officer. So
yeah, and a good dude. I liked him. He was a good kid.
Yeah, I'm real fortunate to have a son-in-law like Cam. Yeah. So that was a biggie there. We started making our AR receivers in-house. You know, that was the decade where we really started getting aggressive about manufacturing stuff in-house. Did a lot of machine shop expansion. We did the collaboration with Beretta, which is, you know, been a real good deal. So we started making our own rifle barrels in-house during that decade. So there's a lot happened in that you know, fourth decade of the company.
And really, that's the decade you can say where you really did become a manufacturer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that was the key one.
Yeah, we kind of went from a custom gunsmithing shop to being a true firearms manufacturer during that fourth decade.
That first 40 years was pretty impressive, and really, the last 5 brings us up to the 45th anniversary.
Yeah,
there's been some pretty impressive things that's happened. I don't think anybody that's in this industry hasn't had a chance to look at and say, Bill Wilson's decision to bring the X9 to market changed everything. And obviously the manufacturing process. Most people don't realize in today's world, to bring a new handgun to the market, you're probably going to commit, if you're lucky, somewhere between $3 to $5 million to bring that. By the time it's all done, which, you know, that's not a casual endeavor for most people. But, you know, I think you read the tea leaves right, and you kind of looked at what the future held. And when I remember you first started talking to me about this concept.
I remember it was here in your dining room.
Yeah.
I started going over with you, you know, my idea, you know, the concept of that pistol.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you were all that excited about it at the very start of it.
You know, honestly, I thought, he's crazy. You know, because I thought this is going to cost an incredible amount of money, and you're going to have to put together a team from engineering, the manufacturing. I mean, it is an incredible task. Most people think, oh, you just fire up a CNC machine, and it doesn't work that way. And then we started, I remember, for example, I said, why would you put a grip safety on the gun? That, to me, is a weak link in the 1911. So we started bouncing stuff back. And it's what would it be? A year or two we talked about that before it actually.
Oh yeah, the whole process from the concept of, okay, this is, in my mind of basically what I want to do to the time that we actually started testing functional prototypes. I mean, that was over a 2-year period.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and the thing I think we all were a little shocked about, I think at times is how the X9 platform has grown. Originally you had a pistol. Well, now I don't know how many SKUs you have, but there's a lot of different variations. Of course, the new stuff is the SF series, solid frame series, and of course now one of the guns that I've got on my hip and you've got on is the new SFT9, which we're going to be shooting on the range today.
Yeah.
And I think it's in many ways is you know, you keep saying you keep pulling another rabbit out of your hat with the SF X9 series, and I think we all recognize it's probably going to go on for a while.
Yeah, I don't think we're done yet. Yeah. But yeah, that was the biggie for the last 5 years of this 45-year anniversary thing. You know, was the X9 stuff, and then of course 300 hammer. You know, that we put a lot of effort into that deal. We did that in 2018, and the major expansion of Machine Shop 4. I mean, that was a real biggie there. You know, we're fortunate enough that, you know, this panic buying from the pandemic and, you know, people panicked from all the rioting and all the various, you know, it was almost a perfect storm, you know, to scare the crap out of everybody. So everybody wanted to buy, you know, gun stuff. You know, instead of just putting a bunch of money in the bank, you know, I made the choice to put it all back into the company, and that's kind of what, you know, funded all that Machine Shop 4.
Yeah.
So.
And I think realistically, a big step, which I know at times you probably even question is, do I get into this custom Glock market because everybody's in it? But I think you finally, we talked about it, it's like, why leave the money on the table? Why not offer it? And I'm going to guess it's been pretty successful.
Well, we keep one guy busy doing nothing but, you know,
and then
on
the next one, which was surprised a lot of people, was what's Bill Wilson doing getting in the Sig Sauer market of custom 320s? Well, the truth of the matter is, it's worked out real well for you.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, it's the new military sidearm, so it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a pretty cool gun.
Wow.
I mean, you know, as far as polymer guns go, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. So really, thinking back, when you decided to make the move into the custom Wilson Beretta 92s, in many ways, you brought the Beretta 92, which was kind of slipping off the table, back into the marketplace as a desirable gun. And I'm sure Beretta didn't miss that, because they quickly brought out the 92X, which, if you look at it, is kind of like they took what Wilson did and kind of copied it, and, you know, kind of ripped you off a little bit as far as they saw what was in demand and what sells, and they copied it. And that's the way the competition is. Yeah. And the SIG system, I think, and let's face it, your grip modules, everybody has said, what a home run. I mean, you put your Wilson Combat grip module on the 320 or the little 365. I don't know anybody that tried it or tried one that said, I don't like it. Everybody's like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, the 320 was a real home run, and the 365 just blew that one completely out of the water. Yeah. I mean, we got caught with our pants down on the 320. We didn't initially mold nearly enough, so we were out of them, you know, right after launch. We ran out of them. So when we did the 365, well, we're not gonna make that mistake again. You know, we're gonna have a lot of them in inventory when we announce the thing. But it went over so well. There was exactly the same thing happened 2 weeks into after the launch. We're out of product.
Out of product.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Well, that's pretty much the big key things. You know, I mean, a lot of other things that we didn't mention here that happened during this long 45 years. But it's been quite a ride to start from, you know, one-man shop in the back of my dad's jewelry store, you know, to where the company is now with, you know, somewhere around 225 employees, and you know, now with Lehigh Defense added into it, and Chip McCormick Custom, and, you know, we're basically, you know, right now we're operating in 3 different states. So
if I remember correctly, one of the things you didn't bring out here and Tresha didn't put down, and God bless her, but one of the things that most people are not aware of, and if I remember correctly, I may be off on the date, but in the 3rd we'll call decade, somewhere in the third decade, if I remember correctly, you kind of had, shall we say, a life-changing experience where basically you kind of almost had to start the business over. That's something called a divorce.
Oh yeah. That.
But the
basically in late 99, 2000. I mean it's.
And I remember that period.
It was a tough time for me personally and for the company. I mean the company got into some serious problems at that due to the divorce crap and all that stuff and you've been there before. I mean it's like it was quite a financial setback.
Yeah, and I remember in a sense of watching, because you and I had been already buds for 25 years or so, and my observation was initially it financially really hit you business wise. It does everybody. In your case, it was pretty brutal, but it was interesting to watch you kind of as a result of like, I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm going to power my way out of this. And from being an aggressive business decisions and posture, you rebuilt Wilson Combat. And quite honestly, it is, obviously your success from that point on, this company has just went up and up and up because you were kind of forced. I got my back to the wall. I got to go. And so sometimes
the way I looked at it is, okay, well, she got all the golden eggs, but I kept the goose.
Yeah, that's life. But interesting. I hope you all enjoyed this. I mean, kind of going back in time is interesting. I think even you probably at times have you tend to forget what all took place. And let's face it, there were a few downward spirals in there.
There's lots of downtime, as opposed, but overall, I think it's been a fun adventure.
Yeah, and this 45th anniversary gun is really a testimony to the success that Wilson Combat has been capable of putting together as a business. And let's face it, wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for you, Bill. You are the powerhouse and the guy who has had that vision. And so in many ways, this gun is it's not just a 45th anniversary gun. It's a trophy gun for Bill Wilson that you can say, I did it right.
I mean, it's retro, but it's something that couldn't have been produced in its era.
Right.
Let's face it, this quality of gun could not have been produced in 1977.
And I think if you're a fan of Wilson Combat or you lived through that era, this is a super cool gun to have in your collection.
Yeah.
Listen, folks, I hope you enjoyed it. Kind of nice going back in time with Bill. Some of you found out some stuff you didn't know. It's been an interesting journey. We look forward to the next 45 years, maybe. Anyway, hey, hit the subscribe button. More good stuff coming your way on the Wilson Combat YouTube channel. Don't be afraid to make a comment. And most important, we'll see you the next time. You guys stay safe and take care.